Hey folks, it's been a while since I've done a Q&A here on the channel, so I thought I'd give it another whirl. This time I've got a bit of a gimmick. I asked you guys to submit your questions in video format so that we could all see your beautiful, shining faces. So without any further ado, let's hop right into it.
Dear Atun-Shei films, your fireside talks with Johnny have brought many people to see the folly of the lost cause and to see the light of our righteous cause. Now that Johnny has seen the error of his ways, whatever became of him? Signed, Lieutenant Thompson Palmer.
I think Archive of Our Own has several literary works that delve into that question in great detail.
First, thank you for covering the English Civil War and the radical thought that it gave birth to. That period does not get the kind of attention that it deserves. Anyway, here's my question. Have you given any thought to covering an earlier revolution, the Dutch Revolt, otherwise known as the 80 Years' War? After all, the United Provinces of the Netherlands got rid of their king nearly 70 years before the English.
The Dutch Republic isn't really my area of expertise, but I do think it's an interesting comparison. And, the Dutch were really key players in creating the first truly global market. And, it's something you see over and over again throughout the early modern period. When the merchant class is empowered, when you have a rising middle class, suddenly enriched with, mercantilism and through sort of global trade and colonization and globalization and all that kind of stuff, then the old systems of feudal power don't really make much sense anymore. Sort of the lubricant, the economic lubricant of your society has changed. No longer is land the basis of wealth, but capital is the basis of wealth. And it makes sense as well that the Netherlands will also be a cradle of liberalism and of free thought and of art and culture as well, because you start to see that sort of when that feudal order sort of diminishes in certain countries in Europe, then sort of a new kind of more Republican, more democratic, not entirely of course, sort of system of government sort of rises to take its place as that sort of merchant class then essentially kind of takes the reins of not just economic power, but political power. I'm going to be making a lot of content about the American Revolution next year for the 250th anniversary. And and that's really how I want to sort of center that event in the transition from feudalism to capitalism. We kind of have this sort of false idea, this misunderstanding about the American Revolution, that the sort of wonderful ideas of liberalism and democracy and human rights were sort of this brand new idea, when in fact, in a lot of ways, the revolution was sort of the culmination of 200 years of economic and ideological development. And really a lot of those ideas of human rights and democracy and self-governance and all that kind of stuff, the settlers of the sort of what would become the 13 colonies, I mean, they brought a lot of those ideas with them.
Hey Andy, greetings from Brazil. So a main staple of the channel in this last couple of years has been Checkmate's Lincolnite, which wrapped up this year. Is this changing focus from the American Civil War to the Revolutionary War a way of quote-unquote moving on from checkmates? Or are these unconnected and I'm reading too much into it?
Well, even before the finale, I'd sort of stopped making checkmate videos regularly since like 2021. And I feel like sort of creatively and mentally I've kind of moved on a long time ago. But no, I mean, I think it has more to do with, like, as I said, the anniversary and also, I think it's the logical kind of next step for the work that I've done on the Puritans and sort of framing them sort of as this liberalizing force and framing them as, sort of shining a spotlight on their forgotten progressivism. And I think that you see it kind of beginning with the Puritans in New England and then sort of continuing on through American history, this idea of sort of right-seeking being a basic facet of American life. And, initially that sort of, and more, I guess, to the point and sort of in a darker sense, always in American democracy or pseudo-democracy, whatever you want to call it, there's always been kind of a privileged in-group to whom those sort of rights are inviolable. But people outside of that in-group, individuals outside of that in-group, well, I mean, whatever, right? They're sort of open season for oppression and violence and rights violation. And throughout American history, and I would argue this began in the 1630s, throughout American history, you saw that sort of circle of moral concern sort of expand as sort of people outside of that circle started to seek their rights sort of within the circle, right? And I think that is very apropos of the revolution. I think it's very apropos of Jacksonian democracy, of the Herrenvolk democracy of the Confederacy. I really think that the revolution is kind of the nexus. Sort of, we're going back in time from the Civil War and from sort of the abolitionist movement, which I've, of course, covered regularly, and then going sort of forward in time from the Puritans. And I feel like it all kind of converges on this 8-year period of the Revolutionary War.
So, Andy, most historians of revolutions like Mike Duncan tend to ignore the 1688 Glorious Revolution, whereas you mentioned it as the Witchfinder General. What is more that can be done on this topic, and how is it relevant and exploratory of American history in general?
Yeah, so this is exactly the sort of thing I'm talking about. I think 1688 really fits within that sort of framework of the bourgeois revolutions, of the transition, from feudalism to capitalism. And, it's easy to kind of think of the Glorious Revolution as just another squabble between Protestants and Catholics, and that's kind of what it sort of appears to be at first glance. But I'd say that the sort of biggest legacy of that revolution was that it was a liberalizing force, and it was kind of it sort of was like the ship kind of righting itself. It was the compromise that was kind of necessary in British society, because Cromwell sort of went way too far on one hand, and then Charles II was kind of went way too far on the other. The Restoration sort of happened because people were desperate to be done with Cromwell and the Puritans, but then of course this was sort of the era of the Sun King, the late 17th century, the height of absolutism, and sort of the, in a lot of ways, kind of like a last gasp of the feudal order to kind of retain its power that was slipping away under sort of this new global economic sort of paradigm that was emerging. And then of course, with James and sort of with this sort of tension between king and parliament that had been going on for generations in England at that point, I think that you start to see with William and Mary, you kind of see this counterbalance. It's sort of the ship stops capsizing and sort of ends up in this equilibrium where you have you still have a monarchy, but it's a defanged monarchy, a liberalized society, a much more sort of representative government. Yeah, I mean, I think 1688 was to Britain what 1776 was to America. I think it's crucial to understanding within the context of the early modern revolutions, for sure.
Hey Andy, so a lot of your videos recently have focused on pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology, and giving academics a practical guide to tackling that online. Any STEM-specific advice for dealing with a similar rise in pseudoscience recently online? And finally, what's your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. What can I say? I'm a child of the 90s. My advice to scientists is pretty similar to my advice for historians and archaeologists, which is you've got to become a good communicator, right? You've got to become as good a storyteller as you are a scholar, and you've got to reach people and come to people where they're at, which is online. Learn the language of the online world, learn the sort of humor of memes, and not everything has to be sort of this terminally online thing, but you need to understand the media landscape that the internet is sort of ushering in. What sort of art forms are people sort of searching for online? What are they interested in watching? How can those forms be sort of adapted to fit, whether it be sort of an old school type of documentary or a traditional sort of academic or pop history sort of lecture? How can those things be sort of adapted to the art forms of new media? How can the form sort of complement the content? These are very important things that any academic or intellectual, in the sort of traditional sort of institutions of STEM or the humanities or whatever, needs to consider when they are trying to democratize that education to a wide audience, and in doing so, combat pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudoarchaeology, all that stuff, and embrace populism. This is really important, and it's something that a lot of people from sort of old school traditional institutions fail pretty miserably at. When Dr. Fauci got on TV and he was being grilled by, I think it was Rand Paul or somebody in front of Congress, the Republican Congress people asked him, Dr. Fauci, your story seems to be inconsistent about this. It seems to be, you seem to be like sort of talking out both sides of your mouth about that, trying to sort of do these gotcha kind of questions.
A planner who believes he is the science leads to an arrogance that justifies, in his mind, using government resources to smear and to destroy the reputations of other scientists.
And Fauci goes, I can't believe you. You don't know what you're talking about. You simply don't have all the facts. You are not educated in this matter.
Senator, you are distorting everything about me. Madam Chair, I would like just a couple of minutes because this happens all the time. You personally attack me, and with absolutely not a shred of evidence of anything you say. What happens when he gets out and accuses me of things that are completely untrue is that all of a sudden that kindles the crazies out there, and I have life that threats upon my life.
I am Dr. Fauci. I am a virologist. And he came across like a pompous asshole. He came across like a pompous, out-of-touch, elitist dickhead. Don't be like Dr. Fauci, right? Don't be like Dr. Fauci. Learn the lessons from that. Dr. Fauci looked like an idiot, and his reputation plummeted, and this virologist who did all these amazing things over a long career, that's all he's going to be remembered for, right? We are in a new age. We are in a new age, and this is not something that you can combat. I know a lot of people are not going to want to hear this. This is not something you can fight. The old institutions are dying. People are not going to want to pay $30,000 a year to learn about archaeology in a classroom. They're just not, right? That's just not, those days are over, they're done. They are done, right? People look for information online. And that's where, and they're going to listen to the person who is most charismatic and best at communicating. These are decades-long historical and material circumstances, right? We're going back to, this age of populism was set in motion in the 80s with, Macintosh computers at home and Bill Gates and all this stuff, right? This has been in motion for decades. It has been in motion for probably longer than most of you have been alive. And it is just continuing. The train is continuing with or without you. Get on the train. Get on the train. Embrace populism in your rhetoric, in your communication style, and in your institutions, right? If you are part of an institution in STEM or the humanities, a university, a research lab, whatever, change those institutions from the inside. If you don't, they will die.
I guess the question on everyone's mind is, what is the current status of Frozen 50s Man? I mean, is it quietly canceled? What exactly happened to it?
Frozen 50s Man. Have you had any bites on like a channel picking it up? I know that was the goal. What does that process even look like? Are you gonna make more? I absolutely love it. So, Frozen 50s Man, please.
No. Frozen 50s Man has not been canceled. In fact, we wrote the 4th episode, and we're filming it this winter, and many of familiar faces are returning. Benton Guinness is going to be in it. Matthew Rigdon's going to be in it. Kendra, of course. And yes, we joked about it getting picked up by a TV network, which I would love to have happen, but I never seriously thought it was in the cards. The closest that ever came to happening was that I pitched Frozen 50s Man to Nebula a while back. And I basically said, look, if you give us $10,000 in a budget per episode, I will take Frozen 50s Man off of YouTube and I'll make it a Nebula exclusive, and it'll be just your thing. I'll just make them for you. I'll make 2 episodes a year for you as long as you want me to. The only catch is I want to keep doing it in New Orleans. I want to do it sort of with the people that I have a rapport with, and they didn't go for it, sadly. I think they have their own sort of group of like YouTubers and filmmakers who they're friends with and that they are more interested in working with and they would rather throw money at, which is completely understandable, really. Yeah, and I think they also kind of had a vision that I would like come and work on like their stuff, right? Like I would like crew on their films or something, or I would be part of like, a Patrick Willems production. And Patrick Willems is great. I'm not, I like his videos, but it's just not really something I'm like super interested in, right? I've got sort of my own thing going on with my own people. And shockingly enough, I do not think that police procedural spoofs are really that sought after in the new media landscape. Weird, right?
Hey Andrew, Rachel. As a lifelong Southerner and as a New Orleanian myself for the past decade or so, my question is, how has relocating from New England to the Southern United States impacted or affected your understanding of U.S. history and especially the history of the South? Thank you so much for what you do. Keep doing it. Accessible history education is so important.
I'm not sure, to be honest. It's a good question. I think it might have affected my understanding of politics much more than history. I grew up in a small upper middle class town in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has problems, but in that kind of environment they're not super like visible, you know what I mean? Like it's everybody's quality of life is like generally more or less fine. Moving first to North Carolina in 2009 and then to New Orleans in 2014, poverty became something that sort of I saw on a daily basis, for the first time in my life, like real, like extreme poverty. At first it was horrifying and it was a culture shock, and then it was mundane. That kind of made me realize that our current system is not really working for most people, and that even in places where it seems to be working, like Eastern Massachusetts, or I spent a lot of time in Colorado this year and in Denver and Boulder, the sort of prosperity and the opulent lifestyles of those places is supported by the existence of an underclass, just like it is here in the South. It's just that underclass is kind of hidden away, so the nice suburbanites don't really have to deal with it, right? There's a level of ecological destruction and labor exploitation that makes that sort of insanely opulent post-industrial middle-class lifestyle possible. But it's just in other neighborhoods, it's in other cities, it's in other states, it's in other countries, right? So it's not super visible. So yeah, that definitely had, I think, a pretty big effect on my understanding of the world. But I would say in terms of history, moving south has probably had a huge impact on my understanding of history, but maybe in ways that I'm not entirely aware of.
Hey, I've noticed that a lot of your more recent videos, especially with your abolitionist series, has been more explicitly politically radical in its messaging. Would you say that this is reflective of a larger change in your own belief system over time, or is it just kind of where your interests are at the moment?
Both. Definitely. I started getting involved in activism about 4 years ago. And most of the stuff that I've been involved in, kind of when you look at it on its face, they're really very benign causes. It can have a very radicalizing effect when you are just in a group that's just trying to like save animals, and serious discussions need to be had about who in the group might be an FBI plant. That kind of makes you think that the powers that be are more interested in corporate profit than they are in doing the right thing, or even modestly moving society forward in any way. And yeah, that's definitely, as evidenced by my abolitionist series, that's definitely made me sort of identify much more with the sort of radicals and revolutionaries throughout history. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that the most effective activism I can do, and the sort of most powerful way that I can leave the world a better place than I found it, is by using my particular sets of skills and my platform to inspire people and play around with ideas. And, you know, I think it would be a moral failing for me to have the power of a large platform and not use it for what I see to be good. I know there are many who will argue that that is not the place of a historian, but I have good news. I'm not a historian, nor have I ever claimed to be. I'm a filmmaker who happens to be pretty good at research. And the way that I've approached my work has always been as an art form. I don't just want people to learn something, I want them to feel something, and I want to make them think. I hold all my beliefs super provisionally, right? I don't really go in for dogma. I see ideology as a tool with which one can better understand the world. I think that ideology, as a lens to look through, can illuminate things in the historical record that have gone overlooked. And I don't just mean in terms of ideologies that I agree with. That would be absurd. I think, for instance, a devout Catholic historian might be able to glean something from the historical record or from a particular set of documents or from a topic or a subject or whatever that a Marxist historian would overlook or wouldn't even think to emphasize, and vice versa. For example, my recent video about the ecological Indian is very much an ideological piece. I mean, I'm a pretty hardcore environmentalist, and I have gotten frustrated with historians and the general public kind of conflating indigenous conservation practices with my ideology. And I approached the topic from that perspective. And I think that in that video, I sort of drew indigenous ecological practices into much sharper focus than they would have otherwise been if that video was made by someone who was less enthusiastic about tofu and composting than I am. And you know, crucially, I think in that video I also subjected my own perspective and my own ideology to considerable scrutiny, which I think is so important. I think self-reflection is key, you know, when you are approaching history from an ideological viewpoint. You know, for example, Thomas DiLorenzo, you know, who wrote the book The Real Lincoln, which is all the sort of Lincoln, where all the Lincoln is a tyrant stuff comes from. Well, you know, sort of in recent years. You know, Thomas DiLorenzo, he isn't a bad historian because he's a libertarian. He's a bad historian because his research is fucking sloppy, right? It's not, there's a difference between being ideological and being dogmatic. And actually, I've dabbled in libertarian history myself. Episode 8 of Checkmate Lincolnites, which is my favorite episode, I think is the most brazenly ideological episode in that series. Episode 8 is looking at the states' rights doctrine from a libertarian perspective. Like, I am an anti-authoritarian guy. Like, I think the best government is that which governs least. I do believe that. And I am frustrated by libertarians who ostensibly believe the same things that I do, at least in that sense, sort of holding up the Confederacy as this great sort of bastion of anti-authoritarianism, when in fact, I would argue it was just the opposite. And, you know, getting back to the sort of the question here, I don't think it's always appropriate for me to put my own opinions in my stuff, right? I view Atun-Shei not as like episodes of a TV show, but as a whole like TV network or a whole TV channel or a streaming service where you'll find lots of different shows and films and stuff of different genres, right? I don't really like to limit myself in that way, you know, and I think something like, you know, The Birth of an American Town would be a extremely inappropriate vehicle for my own ideology. Although, of course, again, the choices that I make in that series and in others like it, which I see as like as non-ideological, you know, that's informed by my own biases, consciously or not. And, you know, every once in a while I reserve the right to just drop an opinion piece, frankly. You know, I mean, like my Confederate Monuments video or my overanalyzing Ravenous video, you know, sometimes it's just fun to just have a good old-fashioned rant every once in a while.
Hi, Atun-Shei. What are your political views on many things? And also, are you kind of conservative on some issues or not?
I mean, well, I don't think so. I see all my views as being very progressive and forward-thinking, but sure. I mean, there's certainly some things that I believe that are sort of arbitrarily sort of have been placed on the right side of the political spectrum. I mean, I think that it's definitely bothers me how sort of free speech has become kind of a MAGA thing. I made some social media post recently about how, I just mentioned free speech in there, and somebody was like, well, we shouldn't give free speech to Nazis, right? And I'm thinking, like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, like, of course we should give free speech to Nazis. Free speech means free speech for everybody. And I know it's scary when, Patriot Front goes, goose-stepping down your street, but like, free societies are a little dangerous, and frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way, It just seems like, what's the plan here, right? If we're like criminalizing Nazis, and like they can't speak freely, or they can't like organize, or they can't assemble in public, like, so who's gonna enforce that? Our famously anti-racist, brave police forces? Like when we're sort of taking people's speech away, who's going to be sort of primarily at the reins of that? The corporate-owned fucking boomers who own our fucking government, who are in charge of fucking the rich-ass fucking, like, vampires? Like, that's who we're going to, like, entrust this power to? No, absolutely not. The best way to get rid of Patriot Front when they're goose-stepping down your fucking street is not calling the cops. It's community defense, not to put too fine a point on it. And I don't think we should outsource our community defense to the government.
Hi. In previous videos of yours, I noticed you had an Animal Liberation Front poster behind you, and I saw that you were working with Pro-Animal Future in Denver. I was wondering, have you ever considered making a video just about the Animal Liberation Front?
Well, eventually I would love to do an abolitionists episode about the Green Scare, which is kind of ALF adjacent. For those of you who don't know, the Animal Liberation Front is a nonviolent direct action group that is decentralized. So basically, it doesn't have like a leader or whatever. It's just anybody who rescues animals from a bad situation, like a fur farm or a vivisection lab, who abides by a certain set of principles, can call themselves ALF. And the Green Scare is a story that is not widely known, but should be. In the 90s, the animal rights and radical environmental movements had like kind of a moment. They were getting huge wins in activism, and direct action was at an all-time high. And it was like big news, right? It was like seeping into the culture. I don't know if many of you remember The Lost World of Jurassic Park, but Vince Vaughn's character is like literally a hunt saboteur. He says like at the beginning, oh, I work for Greenpeace. And then halfway through the movie, he pulls out a monkey wrench that like Earth First and Edward Abbey, these like famous eco-defenders made famous. It's like, I'm not just in Greenpeace. And then they go and rescue dinosaurs from cages in an ALF-style raid against like the ghoulish corpos and big game hunters. It's awesome. But this is a major motion picture, Steven Spielberg movie. This was like in the culture. And after the Bush administration came into power and 9/11 happened and the Patriot Act was passed, the government had a huge crackdown on the animal and earth liberation movement. And under the strengthened legislation, any activist who did $10,000 or more worth of damages to an animal enterprise, basically a corporation that exploits animals, could be charged as a domestic terrorist. Now, damages could refer to property damage, as with the Animal Liberation Front or the Earth Liberation Front, but it also could refer to lost profits. So this meant that entirely above board, totally legal activism was now being prosecuted as terrorism.
Tell me what you're here about.
Well, my name is Josh Harper. I'm one of the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty 7. We're 6 activists plus 1 activist group, Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty, who are indicted under federal terrorism laws. The interesting thing is, though, we didn't break anything, we didn't burn anything, we didn't beat anyone, we didn't even so much as trespass. our crime is doing exactly what I'm doing right now, speaking. Everything in this case, every charge, every count in the indictment relates to things that we wrote, things that we said, and things that we posted on the internet. So right now, I'm facing 5 years in federal prison for talking, and 3 of my co-defendants are facing as much as 23 years in prison for running a website.
This, I am afraid, will become very relevant again very soon, because a few weeks ago, the House of Representatives just passed a bill, I believe, that would give the Treasury Department unilateral authority to strip the nonprofit status of any nonprofit that they deem to be supporting terrorism. So I think we're going to see another green scare and another red scare and another black scare and pretty much every scare you can probably possibly imagine under Trump 2 with this new law. Maybe, we'll see. But in any case, I think it's something that people should learn about because, you know, the animal and earth liberation movements went through this, 20 years ago. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of other people are going to start going through it too. Again, a Trump-helmed Treasury Department, does Planned Parenthood support terrorism? Does the Trevor Project support terrorism, right? I volunteer for an animal rights group and an environmental group. Based on what I've said in this video, do those groups support terrorism, Anyway, thank you all for sending in your questions. I know I didn't get to all of them. Even, there were ones that I didn't get to that were just so juicy and thought-provoking and wonderful. And yeah, I just really appreciate you guys sending them in. And I'm very lucky to have an audience that is wicked smart. I'll see you guys in the next video. Like, subscribe, buy my movie. Support me on Patreon. Smash the state, all that good stuff. So, yeah. See ya.